People in the United States think it's a really good idea to pay $25 copay, go and see their doctors for 5 or 10 minutes because they want it to be cheap. But what the does that matter if the advice that you're getting sucks? People are stunned when they hear me talk, and I show them papers from 15, 20, 30 years ago that show you that the more time you spend in the sun, the longer you live. Don't you find it kind of funny that Bill Gates and dermatologists are aligned on the sun? They both want to block it. Might that be because they benefit from it?
How is it possible that food isn't a big part of the disease that we're facing here in the United States when so many people are overweight?
All of you who have this calories in, calories out perspective need to ask yourself this question. How does food explain a kid that's born with a retinoblastoma? It doesn't. When you learn how to use the sun and you learn how to use cold on the cold receptors, there's no need for GLP-1 drugs. There's no need for any of the drugs that are out there. It's no longer about survival of the fittest. It's about survival of the wisest. What's going on? Can you hear me?
Absolutely, we can hear you. Excited to have you on the show today.
All right.
This is Nsima to my right here.
I can't see the screen, just so you know that.
Well,
it's pretty bright here at the 13th North latitude. So right now, the computer screen looks dark. I actually had to put an umbrella up. I thought I would be able to see, and I still can't see.
Well, we have to my right, we have Nsima, and he is a beautiful, jacked black prince.
Which at this point, I'm invisible since he can't even see the screen.
Yeah. And then we also have Andrew Zaragoza here with me today. So I got a couple different voices that you're going to be hearing today.
All right, cool. So I have 3 black princes.
I will take it.
Yeah, there you go.
Andrew, just so you know, the town I live in El Salvador is called Zaragoza, so we have something in common.
That's amazing, sir. Thank you for sharing that. I'll have to visit someday.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. I don't know if you guys heard Bukele's speech last night at CPAC, but it was pretty awesome.
No, I didn't hear about that. Could you tell us a little bit to kick things off about your involvement with El Salvador? I believe you wrote some like medical law acts. I think that's pretty fascinating.
Well, it started a long time ago. I was asked last year to come present at a government-sponsored event to give your best ideas of what a country might do in terms of decentralizing life, so to speak. So I gave probably my top 20, but some of the ones that I gave were pretty big ass kickers. And one of the administration guys there, very high up, had a notebook, and he was furiously writing for the whole 2 hours I was there. Technically, not allowed to really talk about what we did because there was Chatham rules in place. But let's just say from that initial gathering, the Rolling Stone is now a boulder. The boulder is turning into an avalanche. The avalanche is turning into, I think, something that everybody in the world is going to pay attention to in 2024. And the reason I mentioned to you guys about Bukele's speech, you know, I talked to the president literally 5 days ago. He was with me. And he told me he had this speech coming up, and he goes, I don't really have a topic. And he goes, what do you think I should talk about? And I said, just tell the world the truth. And the reason I mention it to you guys, I mean, here we are doing a podcast. And like this speech goes down, you know, at a predominantly Republican event. And what he said to those people in the audience was basically like, he gave them some red meat for their people, but what he said about CPAC and about what they think about some of their things, like he outed them. And the truth be told, if you really look at Bukele and what he's doing between finance and medicine, he's much more aligned with Bobby Kennedy than he is with Trump, and definitely not Biden. Biden is probably the fucking outlier. But Bobby Kennedy and Bukele are pretty, I think, the closest alignment that you're going to see. And, you know, our election in the States is not until November. Bukele's election just happened, for those of you who don't know, on February 4th. He won his particular seat 84%. 4 years ago, he only won by a 53% margin. But the most amazing part, you know, of his journey, he now controls 95% of the Congress in El Salvador. So What has the people resoundingly said? We loved what you did the first 5 years. We can't wait to see what you're going to do in the second 5 years, and we want you to continue on. And some of the things that I can tell you that I worked with them on last year and that we're going to work on this year, pay attention to that little country, boys, because some of the things that you probably talk to people about on podcasts all the time, when you hear the plans that this guy has and what he plans to do, basically he's building an ark here. The rest of the world is falling apart, from a variety of different reasons, economic, politically, medically. We all just live through it collectively, no matter what your ideology is with COVID. And I'm sure each one of you probably have your own modus operandi or a collection of beliefs around that. My beliefs, I think, are pretty well documented in all the podcasts that I've done. But I can tell you that ultimately, when you find a politician who speaks but acts and they're congruent, this is the rarest of rare animals. Why? Because most of them speak and they're full of shit. This guy's got now 5 years of history of saying, yeah, I want to do this. And then some of the mistakes that he even made, he's ready to right those wrongs. That, to me, that's what leadership is. If you can backtrack on something that you said and said, look, I just wasn't informed by the people who are supposed to inform me about this, and we're going to change things, and we're going to change them in such a radical way that's going to make faces melt. Bro, that talk that he gave last night, that was the warm-up. Just be ready.
Be your own doctor, I know, is something that you're an advocate for. So I'm imagining some of these laws and things like that are going to allow people to do that. But something I heard you say on Maria Menouno's podcast, which I thought was outstanding. You said, if you can't be good enough for yourself, who can you be good enough for? And I think that's really interesting thing, and it sounds overwhelming to people.
That's the decentralized idea, though, behind patients. This is what patients don't understand. They want the healthcare system to change, but they don't realize they have to become part of the change. Like, for example, people in the United States think it's a really good idea to pay $25 copay, go and see their doctors for 5 or 10 minutes because they want it to be cheap. But what the fuck does that matter if the advice that you're getting sucks? Okay. And the problem is, we know it sucks. Why? Because look at chronic disease metrics that, Bobby Kennedy's been talking about literally since he started to run for president. He's like, bro, the return on equity for the United States, we spend more money on healthcare than anybody else, and we get the worst fucking results. Do you know why that is? Because we're telling people the wrong things. Like, so many people believe, like, I'm going to give you the biggest, probably axiomatic thing that people believe. They believe it's diet and exercise control 95% of the metrics. Bro, if that was the case, fucking explain the United States to me, because it turns out that's not true. Okay. And, people want to always talk about food. And this is a topic I love to talk about when I'm dealing with skeptics. I'm like, if you go back and look at when obesity started, you look at like the sugar stuff or the seed oil stuff, bro, obesity started, the wave started way before both of those things were changed in North America. But nobody, because they believe the narrative, they never question the narrative. What is the metric about decentralized medicine? You probably heard me say a couple other things to Maria Menounos that I think are even more interesting. That it's no longer about survival of the fittest. It's about survival of the wisest. Why? Because you have to begin to question the things that you believe are ideologically true. Okay? And that's how I started my journey 20 years ago. You have to remember something. As an allopathic centralized doctor, even though I make fun of those guys now, I used to be one of those. And why can I make fun of them? Just as Bukele said in his speech, you have to do the heavy lifting of change. You have to realize that what you're saying and what you're doing, there's a responsibility towards that. And you have a duty to the people either that elected you or voted with you. And I know none of you said that you watched the speech, but I really want to motivate you to watch it. Do you know the analogy that he gave in his speech? He said, I want you to think of the patients or the voters of El Salvador and the United States as a patient. He goes, in El Salvador for the last 20 years, our patients were in the ICU dying. He goes, right now in the United States, you're at the door getting ready to walk into the ICU. He goes, it's a disease. And he goes, just getting a president elected isn't good enough. He goes, we've had plenty of presidents in El Salvador that completely fucking shit the bed. Okay? It's about what you do when you get in there. It's the actions behind the words. And I'm going to tell you the same thing is true in healthcare. We have a duty in healthcare and decentralized healthcare to tell people the truth. And the truth as we know it is based on the collection of things that are in the data. Well, a lot of people are stunned when they hear me talk and I show them papers from 15, 20, 30 years ago that show you that the more time you spend in the sun, the longer you live and the healthier you are. Because guess what? That's not the story that you get from the ophthalmologist. It's certainly not the story you get from the dermatologist. And then, you know, I casually like to be agent provocateur on podcasts. And I'll say, don't you find it kind of funny that Bill Gates and dermatologists are aligned on the sun? They both want to block it. Might that be for the same fucking reason? Because they benefit from it. Now, are we benefiting from it? I think we already answered that question on our return on equity post. You know, when we talked about it 5 minutes ago. United States is woeful at listening to dermatology and Bill Gates. But yet, you guys have a podcast. I don't know who you've interviewed. I'm making assumptions on who you have, but I want you to begin, and it almost doesn't matter where you're coming from ideologically. What I'm asking you right now as a decentralized thinker is to begin to question the narratives that you do believe and understand why it's a big deal. Because I think in the world that I want to build at the 13 North latitude is I want doctors to be held to the fire, but I also want patients to have skin in their own game. And we have a duty to teach people, you know, the things that we got right in medicine. Because, you know, instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, let's talk about what allopathic medicine's done right. If you get a subdural or one of your meathead friends, you know, drops the barbell and breaks their neck, we're good at that. We can take care of acute injuries. You break your leg, you get a subdural. We're spectacular at that. What do we suck at? We suck at diabetes. We suck at hypertension. We suck at obesity. We suck at, you know, autoimmune conditions. We suck. I mean, really suck at cancer. Even though we waged a war on cancer the same year we came off the gold standard, most people don't even know part of the Nixon shock was starting the war on cancer. Well, dude, we haven't done shit on cancer since 1971. In fact, I would tell you the return on equity for the war on cancer is as bad as fiat currency is in the United States. That's how fucked up it is. Okay. And the thing is, nobody wants to talk about that kind of stuff. And I always try to tell people, instead of being the drill sergeant and coming on podcasts and having to beat people up with my brain, I actually want to make you realize your wounds create your wisdom. Like in medicine, when we go through training, we have this thing called Morbidity and Mortality Conference, similar to what you guys are doing with me now. You're supposed to be the learned doctors, and I'm supposed to be the measly resident or medical student. And basically, you guys pummel me for an hour or two based on the decisions that I made that previous month on the outcomes of the patients I took care of. We call that Morbidity and Mortality Conference. Why? We are treated like a drill sergeant. We are treated like a bitch, okay? And the reason for that is not because you're made to feel small. It's because you need to learn that the wounds do create the wisdom. The same thing is operational in the military. That's what basic training is all about. Now, some people may say, no, it's designed to create an ideologic shift so that you're more of an obedient idiot for the government. I'll accept that. But I would tell you the same thing may be true in medicine, that we've created 75 years of obedient idiots with my colleagues. I know, because I used to be one of them until I decided to start taking a new class. And that class was educating the doctor that each one of us come built with. You know, that's the instinct that's based in mammals.
Jack, how is it possible that food isn't a big part of the disease that we're facing here in the United States when so many people are overweight?
Yeah, well, because I want you to think about the premise of your question, because it's a good one. And I'm not going to hammer you on this like I would hammer other people, because most people think that food is the cause because they have the belief that calories in, calories out are the big issue. So, Mark, I'm going to teach you something. This is basic physics, okay? When you sprain your ankle, does it get bigger or smaller?
Bigger.
Okay. So when a star, like the one above me, fails, okay, it burns through all its hydrogen, helium, every other element, but then it gets to iron. What happens to it? Does it get bigger or smaller?
I think it gets smaller.
No, it gets bigger. It goes from, the sun now to a red giant. So that's 2 for 2. You see, when energy's failing, things get bigger. Here's the big one. We just came through COVID. A lot of guys, like the dude I think you said was sitting to the left of you, he's like this jacked, huge bro, right? Why is it that those fuckers are dying more of myocarditis, meaning heart failure, than anybody else? Okay? So I'm going to ask you the final question. When you get heart disease or heart failure, does your heart get bigger or smaller? It's bigger. So guess what I just explained to you? Anything that thermodynamically loses energy is actually a problem. So now let's look at obesity. Your premise of your question. Is a fat person fat because they eat too much? Or is it maybe because they're losing energy because the mitochondrial engines in their tissues aren't thermodynamically efficient? Doesn't that change the mix quite a bit? Yeah. See, here's the thing. Your perspective frames your argument. And because you have bought the centralized lie that obesity is calories in, calories out, you'd be incorrect. And the reason I brought up the last point with the myocarditis thing, because this is a big topic even on my forum with my members, because they're offended about what I'm telling them now. I'm telling them that actually obesity actually may be protective in the things that happen with COVID, and they actually may be protective on the things that you guys likely have on your heads right now, in your pockets, and everywhere else. Might it be that everybody's getting fatter because the world that we live in now doesn't use the sun, that uses artificial light? Could that potentially be an issue, given the perspective that I just gave you about stars, about hearts, and about ankles? And all I'm asking you is not to buy what I'm selling you. I'm asking you a rhetorical question. Explain to me why it is that everything that's bigger seems to lose energy. Not only that, there's actually a longevity benefit. Like if you really want to take this argument to thermodynamics to its peak, and this will be especially good for your guy sitting to your right, why is it that a mouse, really, really tiny, okay, only lives maybe 12, 14, 16 weeks, but an elephant who's huge in Africa lives way longer, way bigger, eats like shit, right? Eats things from photosynthesis. But here's the irony. He lives in the sun all the time. The mouse lives nocturnally under the ground. And the crazy thing is when you look at the number of heartbeats they have in their life, no matter how long their life is, they're almost identical. That's called Kleber's power law. And what does Kleber's power law teach the black swan mitochondria? That it's all about energy. In fact, it's not about the fuel. In fact, when you look at foods, the way I look at foods are an electromagnetic barcode of where the sun is in relation to the earth. So for example, the foods that I can eat and the foods you guys eat, depending on where you are, I would venture to say that none of you should be eating papaya, but it's growing in my backyard right now. Okay? And therein lies what nature provides. And it turns out that nature only provides what you're capable of doing because of the light we're in. I mean, take a look at all three of you now. I can't see where you are. I don't know your backgrounds. I don't know anything about you, but again, none of it's important. I'm outside on my roof at the 13th latitude in the sun. I'm assuming you guys are inside. Okay? Do you think that has no consequences for the way your mitochondria work? And because of that Dunning-Kruger moment, do you see how that you might buy the belief that food really does matter? I'm not trying to tell you that it doesn't, but I'm telling you it's about 4th or 5th on the list of things in health that truly matter. And do I agree with your premise that, yeah, we have high fructose corn syrup, we've had sugar and everything, and we've got seed oils and all that. Is all that shit bad? No question. I will not argue that point with you. But the point that I'm going to argue with you is that's where you fuckers want to stay. And that's not going to fucking solve the chronic health issues that we have in the United States. Because guess what? There's a lot of fuckers out there that are eliminating those things already, and they're still fucking dying. Okay? Just remember who really is dying post-COVID. It's not the big fatties that you guys were told by the government in the beginning. It's likely the meathead that's sitting right next to you on the right. So you got to ask yourself a question. Why is it that a guy who looks thermodynamically fit is more at risk? I mean, why did Damar Hamlin die on the field on national TV? Why did J.J. Watt get AFib? Everybody knows what J.J. Watt looks like. But why is it the elite athletes on soccer fields that are dropping dead? Ask yourself that question, because that is the provocative question that we're going to begin to start asking in El Salvador. In other words, we're going to start examining it with research. Why? This research that you guys rely on, it's not in your published research because nobody's thinking about this. Down here, we're going to start thinking about it.
So, Jack, I am curious, first off, what is your theory as to why this is the case? And then secondly, on top of that, you put food as maybe fourth or maybe fifth on the hierarchy. What does your hierarchy look like?
Well, the number one thing, obviously, is light, meaning sunlight over everything else. Number two is darkness at night. Number three is elimination of artificial magnetic and electric fields. That means EMF pollution. Probably number four is the quality of your water. Water is far more important than food. Then I think number five, I would probably put your relationships, your networks. Then number six, I'd put food.
Wow.
Number seven, I'd probably put exercise. Number eight, depending on a lot of factors, but I'd put your parents, meaning the transgenerational epigenetics that you came into the world with. For example, you guys know that you've probably met families where a kid is born and they have a retinoblastoma and you go, what did this fucking kid do? Like, all of you who have this calories in, calories out perspective need to ask yourself this question. How does food explain a kid that's born with a retinoblastoma? It doesn't. Okay? The kid never ate a meal, but yet the kid has a mitochondrial disease, but nobody thinks about that. Okay? So 20 years ago, when I started to think about food differently, I came upon a couple of papers that really opened my eyes, because what is the interaction between us and the environment? It's our skin, right? You can see my skin is nice and pink. Your guys' skin, I don't know what it looks like, but I'm assuming it's probably not idealized for your biology. And I started to realize, what is it about the link between our skin and the environment? Could there be some type of connection in our skin that would, say, control our gut, say, control the mitochondria in us? And guess what? 2001, 2002, I started to find papers that, in fact, showed that. The number one organ that it showed was that actually the biology of light on your skin affected how much fat was in your liver. That was in 2001, dude. Now, you guys led with, hey, let's talk about food and chronic disease. How many people have you had on the podcast that told you that circadian skin biology actually leads to a fatty liver? I guarantee you none. I'm probably the first one. And guess what? I told you that showed up in the literature 23 years ago. Let me ask you three a question. Why is that? You know why? Because the people feeding you the propaganda, bro, that you bought, they're really good at their job. Really, really good at their job. And they want to keep you focused on food and exercise. You know why? Because then you won't look at the real shell game, the wizard behind, which is the guys in Big Pharma. Okay? That's the truth.
We did have David Herrera, who's been studying a lot of your work for a long time. We've had him on the show, and he presented some of these ideas. So we're aware of your work. We're not insulted by it. I think we're open to it. And I really liked your hierarchy, your list of the different things that you had in order of importance, because That's what we're fans of. We're fans of like blending all this stuff together, blending the knowledge together, taking ideas and principles that maybe we didn't believe in before. Maybe we did think cold therapy was bullshit. Maybe we did think red light therapy was bullshit, but we all have a white belt mentality on this podcast, and that's what this show is about. If I'm understanding you correctly, do you kind of believe, I've kind of heard you make statements before where you'll say, blue light is making us fat. Now, What I'm imagining is that blue light is maybe orchestrating making us fat and not necessarily, quote unquote, making us fat. Does that sound more correct, or what are your thoughts on that?
I'm going to tell you can use the semantics you want. I'm going to give you a pass on that. I'm going to tell you that it's actually a little bit more shocking. I'm probably going to say something for the first time on a podcast that's really going to get me into hot water. Not only is blue light making us fat because of the melanopsin link, but I'm going to tell you that actually it's protective. How's that? You guys know that there's something published in the centralized literature that's been there since I've been in medical school that nobody's been able to explain. It's called the obesity paradox. Now, you'd never know that if you listen to the guys like Fauci during COVID. But it turns out people that are heavier actually tend to be resistant to certain diseases. Now, do I think that message, the reason I haven't resonated loudly with that message is because I think it's operational for certain N=1s. Do I believe in certain cases that actually makes sense from a mitochondrial perspective? The answer is yes. But no one's been smart enough to get me on a podcast to actually ask me that question. I thought maybe Huberman would be the guy to do it. But
I'm a lot smarter than Huberman.
Yeah, well, it became very clear to me when we talked, when he didn't even know where melanopsin came from, and that amphibians predated mammals from an evolutionary perspective. I knew we were going to have some trouble. Why? Because melanopsin is the blue light detector. And melanopsin has now been shown to be found in skin, fat, arteries. I mean, fucking dude, it's everywhere. Okay. And it basically, when you realize that humans are basically a walking blue light detector. And when you realize that in 1893, we built the blue lit world, and even before that, 600,000 years before, we started screwing this up. Like, if you want to know where the retinoblastoma comes through the germline, comes from our ability to put animal skins on when we started to live in caves with fire. That's how long ago this goes back. And we've slowly changed and sculpted, our biology. And you can see it not so much through DNA. You see it much more through the mitochondrial changes. Why? That's why you have all the different haplotypes, and we have the Fitzpatrick skin types, based on the latitudes that we live in. But even that is controversial. Like, I would tell you during COVID, I remember like at beginning of COVID, like February of 2020, me putting some tweets out saying people that have darker skin are going to have worse outcomes when they live at high latitudes because, it's called coronavirus for a reason. Corona meaning when the sun is bright, these viruses react differently. In other words, the virus family that it comes from is responsive to EMF in the environment. So it means if you are African, but you live, let's say in Nairobi, this is going to be a fucking nothing burger. But if you're Somali and you live in Detroit, you're going to be fucking taken to the woodshed. That's exactly what we found.
And that was actually reported on Joe Rogan just a couple of days ago that COVID was almost non-existent in places like Africa.
Correct. Now you know the reason why. But guess what? When I put the tweet out, a lot of the low agency, low dopamine people called me a racist, and I told them to go fuck themselves. Because the thing is, when you're smarter than the people who are your critics, you have a duty to like fucking punch back and tell them, no, you need to listen to what the fuck I'm saying, because this was early in COVID. And remember who I am. I'm a physician. I take care of patients. My job is to do no harm. No matter what you guys think about me, the patients that come and see me, dude, they're my team, at least for the time that they're on it. And I'm going to give them my best. My best at that time told me the narrative was wrong, dead wrong, and that people needed to think about this differently. Instead of locking people up and putting them outside the sun, I'm like, how fucking crazy is it to lock people up and get them outside the sun? And it's called the coronavirus. I'm going, this is like nuts. But guess what? And you guys are probably chuckling right now. But I'm going to tell you, think about how many obedient idiots did just that. How many Karens are out there telling you, oh, you're within 6 feet of me, you fucker. You know, think about it.
Yeah.
It's like, and the point that I'm trying to make to all three of you is where I become passionate about this. That's why I'm trying to tell you, I'm trying to take your biggest beliefs apart. It's not about survival of the fittest anymore. It's survival of the wisest. We need to create 70 to 100,000, 200,000 people in the world that actually can think better than everybody else. And then guess what's going to happen? They're going to congregate in an oasis somewhere where a lot of those people think. It's certainly not going to be in Detroit. It's not going to be in Chicago. It's definitely not going to be in fucking Canada or Australia. Now, will there be pockets in those places that I think this stuff will crop up because of guys like your efforts? Yes, I believe that actually will happen. But my job, just like I told Bukele, just tell people the truth. And don't worry about the arrows you get in your back. That's the thing that me and Bukele have in common. Dude, we got arrows in our back from everybody. If you don't think that I haven't had critics over this for 20 years, people telling me I'm wrong, the funny thing is 20 years ago, I was a crazy motherfucker. Now, people are like, bro, this guy's had it right for a really long time. And maybe we need to start listening to this because guess what? The implications of what I said to Rick and the implications of what I said to Huberman, dude, if you think that I've even scratched the surface, not even close. I mean, some of the stuff that I'm putting out on my Patreon blog now, why light trumps food? Like when I really show you how I figured this out and you see the papers and you read them for yourself and you find out that sunlight controls the circadian mechanism of skin cells and that if you use time-restricted feeding in the morning at the right time, you can actually improve how you handle UV light. Bro, these papers were written in 2001. That's where the stuff in the leptin prescription came from. So when you read the leptin prescription, you see the 6 things there and you go, yeah, why is Jack talking about sweating? Why is Jack talking about hair follicles? Bro, I just gave you the answer. It's about the circadian biology that's in the skin. And it turns out the circadian biology is in the skin. This is the real metric. I believed in 2005 that it controlled the circadian clocks in the gut. And I didn't have any proof for that assertion. So I kept my mouth quiet about it, but it was in the leptin prescription. Guess what? In 2017, I got the key papers. Then I fucking kicked the door down and said, all you fucking food gurus and exercise gurus can go suck my dick because you're wrong. You're wrong. You're dead wrong. And here's the papers that show you're dead wrong. But you know what the problem is? Most of them were too dumb because they were in a gym that's blue lit, lifting weights, stealing energy for their muscles instead of this one right here.
Power Project family, foot health is something that we talk about all the time on the podcast, and that's why we love Vivo Barefoot shoes. But we love them not just because they are flat, flexible, and wide, but also they don't look bad. They look actually really, really good. These are their new boots. These are their Modus trainers for in the gym. These are some of their casual shoes. But when you look at a lot of barefoot shoes, some people get turned off because they don't want to wear those shoes outside. And that's understandable. That's very understandable. But with Vivo, these shoes look so good and they're so good for your feet that they're almost a no-brainer. So, well, they are a no-brainer. Andrew, how can they get some of these kicks?
Yes, you guys got to head over to vivobarefoot.com/powerproject and you guys will receive 15% off your order. Again, vivobarefoot.com/powerproject. Links in the description as well as the podcast show notes. I wanted to ask you about the kind of like someone's nationality, where they were born, and their relationship to the sun. So my mom was born in Mexico. When she was around 18 years old, she moved to Northern California. About 3 years ago, she was diagnosed with cancer. She just died last month. And I'm curious, does that...
Sorry to hear that, bro.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I'm wondering, does something like that, like moving from a location closer to the equator to moving away from the equator, and then obviously there's going to be some daily habits that are going to change, living in a more modern lifestyle here in America, could something like that potentially lead to something as serious as stomach cancer to the point where it does take her life?
Yeah, I would tell you that I think the moving away is the predominant one. I do agree with what you said, that there's a multifactorial game here. But I want to give you 2 examples that hopefully will illuminate this issue that your mom faced, I want you to think about Somalians. We already talked about them. They don't even have a word for autism in Africa. Okay. When they go to Detroit, and the reason I'm picking on Detroit is because that's where most of the Somali population of the United States is. Also in Ontario, in Canada, do you know that they have 40 to 100 times the rate of autism when they relocation from Africa to there? So that should stop you dead in your tracks, because if you look at that, you're going, man, they came from the East African Rift. They're like fucking purple, because they have the most melanin in their surface. So can you create a circadian mismatch when you're really dark and you go to the tundra? So the thing that I want you to get, Mr. Zaragoza, is understand the third grade math behind this. Do you think that you could take a cactus from, say, the Sonoran Desert and put it up in Ontario?
No.
Do you think it would do well? But see, you got that answer right away. But you know what? You genuinely were asking me the question about your mom. And the thing is, you didn't get that about your mom. And what I want to teach you is that this should be so intuitive to you about all life forms, not just plants. It's the same thing that's true with us. And the other thing that you said when you started your question, I didn't want to interrupt you because I think it's important for you to hear. Just because your nationality is what it is doesn't mean you come from there. Let me tell you a story. I have a guy, his name's Jeff. He's a member based in Chicago. He's a little Jewish guy, short and slight. When we did his mitochondrial haplotype, when he was a farm member, I don't know, probably 10 fucking years ago, he found out he was African. He had L0 haplotype. This is a guy that if you looked at him, you'd say, you are so not African, it's not funny. He had Fitzpatrick type 1 skin, but yet his engines was L0. And the way in which I figured it out, when I talked to him, he kept doing all these things, wanted to stay in Chicago, and he did terrible. He had huge problems. But the number one thing that he said to me that clued me in, he had horrible response to cold thermogenesis. And I said, the only people that really can't tolerate cold really well are true Africans who are L0. I said, bro, let's get your haplotype. When I saw that, I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me. So the reason I bring this up to you, Mr. Zaragoza, is I don't want you to make the mistake that a lot of the food girls will make on food. Don't assume because you're from a country or your skin is a certain color or your biology is whatever it is that you really have all the variables down pat, because you don't. And the thing is, it takes a decentralized clinician to sit down with you and look at these kind of variables and go, does this make sense or not? And if it doesn't, then that's when you do testing. See, my critique of the functional medicine guys, they bring you in and they just fucking test everything, even shit that you don't need tested. And then you wind up spending thousands of dollars and they send you back and say, well, I don't know what's wrong with you. To me, that's as bad as putting someone on a statin or a high blood pressure medicine in an allopathic office and draining them dry from letting them be chronically sick, because being sick is probably the most expensive thing to do in North America. Sorry,
Jack,
that was a circuitous way of answering your question, but hopefully you understand it.
Yes, sir, I do. And when I use the terminology like nationality, it's just because I can't find of a better term to say to shortly say she was born in Mexico. And we did a 23andMe, which I'm curious if those are even accurate. And yeah, we have like 2% Congolese in us and a bunch of other things. And so like the main one was just like a Native American. I believe that's what they called it.
Most Mexicans really aren't Mexican. That's the point I'm trying to make out. They're Incan, they're Mayan, and we don't know where those fucking people came from. We've got a lot of guesses, the Clovis people and the indigenous people. But the point that I'm trying to make to you is the one bit of data of all of us that doesn't lie is our mitochondrial haplotype. The other thing that doesn't lie is our Fitzpatrick type on our skin. And you have to find out, is your Fitzpatrick type on your skin and your engines completely yoked the right way? Because if they're not, guess what? You're set up for a huge problem. Like when you are in the wrong environment, bro, that's the reason why black people face what they face in the United States. I mean, think about it. We have a stroke belt in the United States that goes from like Florida up to Washington, D.C., and it's always confounded centralized medicine. So those people get diabetes, type 2, and they're fat diabetics. They're not like the skinny diabetics in India. And they have metabolic syndrome. They have fatty liver. They have hypertension. And this is, to this very day, still confounds my profession. And to me, it makes total sense. Why? These people are built for equatorial environments, and we put them at the 28th to 40th latitude, and we wonder why they have a problem. Remember, we're the ones that fucking brought them here on boats.
Jack, just a quick question on the haplogroup. Are you talking about the maternal or paternal for what you're speaking about right now?
So you just outed yourself as badness. You only get your haplogroup from mama.
Well,
Got it?
See that, and I'm happy you explained that. But for example, 23andMe, right? There's probably a lot of messed up shit there. It has a paternal and a maternal haplogroup, and maybe it's incorrect. So I was just wondering.
It's telling you what your dad is, but you need to know Doug Wallace's work. See, that's where I'm trying to explain to you. It's survival of the wisest. I expect, and I'm really glad you brought this up, because I'm always assuming that I'm talking to my tribe. My tribe would never make or never ask me that question because they already know. But you're right. Most of the people that are probably listening to this podcast don't know that you only get your haplotype from your mom. Your mom is the key. And it turns out women and men are radically different in terms of mitochondria. Why? Because women are born with all their eggs as soon as fertilization happens. Like every egg that a woman will menstruate literally is in her when she's a fetus inside her mother. So it turns out that your grandmother on the maternal side can affect the eggs that you become. So like when I do a hack on somebody and they're my patient, the first thing I want to know is tell me where you live now, then tell me about your mother and tell me about your grandmother. That's actually where everything starts with me. Then we don't get to you till later, because what I'm trying to do is build up an environmental inventory of kind of what the egg that you eventually became faced. Why? Because all those epigenetic switches are changed by what your grandmother did and what your mother did. Then when you come out, your dad throws some, curveballs into the mix. Generally, those curveballs are more big for SAPs and SNPs, which are single amino acid polymorphisms and single nucleotide polymorphisms. That's kind of the stuff that you guys are linking to on the 23andMe stuff that really throws people for a loop. But I'm going to be honest with you, it's kind of like golf. That's like the bullshit. It's the long drive. But what really matters is, can you putt? And you need to focus in on the things that are the main drivers. And that's the reason why we started this podcast. And I told you it's about light. It turns out that light is what changes histones, the chromatin pattern. It turns out that all the things that are key in your mitochondria, which is like NAD positive, which is cytochrome 1, guess what? The circadian clock machinery connects directly to NAD1. Now, when you realize that the sun hits the membranes of mammals, and that's what actually makes the TCA cycle spin. Like a couple days ago, probably a week ago on Instagram, you guys can find the post. It's from 2021. There's a paper out there that says if you don't see the sunrise every morning, you can't fat burn. So think about that for your carnivore and paleo meathead buddies. That if you're eating nothing but protein and fat, but you never see the sunrise, do you think it's a wise choice to eat that type of diet? Because really, the carnivore diet is a wintertime diet. What does the circadian biology of eating really tell us? That the sun has to hit your leptin melanocortin pathway so that all of your TCA cycles can spin the right way, and NAD positive can get that right information. That's the level of complexity you have to get to. So hopefully you guys begin to understand when I hear this nonsense that food controls everything, I want to bitch slap people who say it, because it just shows you how ignorant they are. And I sound crazy to those people because their level of understanding you could put in a box. My level of understanding, every year, I feel like I get smarter and smarter and smarter. Why? Because new papers come out. Because remember, I'm no longer looking where you guys look. I'm looking totally different way. And that's one of the problems with centralized medicine. That's the reason why we have Peter Attias of the world and the Uberans of the world. They keep reading the wrong shit and keep thinking that stuff matters. That's why you hear me talk about the terms via negativa. You have to subtract the superfluous to get to the real thing. It's kind of like when you're having wine. If you're drinking bad wine and some dude opens up an 82 Margaux, dump the bad shit out and let's drink the good stuff. And it's the same thing with information. And I want you to think about these ideas. Instead of going ad hominem on people, I want to attack the way in which they think.
Give us the leptin prescription. Give us a little bit of a breakdown on that so that people can have a better understanding of a lot of the background, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about.
Well, I gave you some of the big insights. I mean, to be honest with you, we're asking on a podcast. I don't think you guys are going to have me on for 10 hours, but I would tell you, go listen to Rick and Huberman. The basics of the leptin prescription, I laid out in a 10-hour podcast, 3.5 hours, which were cut, for the length of time, because guys like you probably don't want to listen to me that long. But I gave you a little bit in this podcast that the skin clocks that interact with the sun and darkness actually control the gut clocks. So when you realize that your master clock is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, you have direct synapses there, and the habenular nucleus. The habenular nucleus is what makes humans special. We have 2 frontal lobes that no other primates have. And that's the reason why today we're dying of suicide more than anything else, because you can see obesity and suicide are linked through this pathway. And people don't really understand how that comes into play. They forget that the skin and the brain come from the same tissue that's in the embryo. It's called neuroectoderm. What is melanin? The major semiconductor protein, both in the brain and the skin. It's also a neuroectodermal derivative. So when you realize how we're all constructed, the leptin prescription, when I wrote it 15 years ago for, general population consumption, have no illusions that Uncle Jack didn't think that people were going to understand quantum mechanics. I wrote it for retards, okay? And that's why it's got 6 quick steps. Now, when you parse out all the different steps, basically what does it say? You get up in the morning, you see the sunrise every day. It tells you never to miss a sunrise ever again in your life. When I go on podcasts and people tell me what's the one actionable thing to do, I just gave it to you. Never make that mistake. Number 2, you want to eat within 30 minutes of the sunrise. I think you guys probably are the first podcasters to ever get that answer out of me. Why is that? Because it turns out time-restricted feeding is another way for you to control the circadian clock genes in your skin. Remember, the skin is how you interact with the EMFs and the environment around you. Then it turns out when you get that right, guess what they control? They control the vitamin D receptor. They control all the non-visual photoreceptors like cholesterol. But what's the big one that you guys will be interested in? They can control all the molecular clock genes in your gut. All of a sudden, you begin to realize, was it food that really did it, or was it light? And then what do I tell you at the end of the leptin prescription? How do you know when you're hitting your metrics? All of a sudden, you'll stop wanting to snack, because a lot of the guys will eat 7, 8, 9 times a day. You'll start to sweat better. And all of a sudden, you'll start to know that hair starts to grow back in skin. You didn't have it. So for like allopathic doctors that are listening to this podcast, they're going to say, so is that why diabetics lose the hair on their legs? The answer is yes, because they're all leptin resistant. But does it also explain why they have aberrant sweating patterns? Yes, it does, because the circadian mechanism of the skin is gone. Okay, it's absolutely demolished. But what you also need to realize, is it also the reason why there's no melanin in the skin? The answer is correct. So when you follow the steps, what am I basically doing? I'm teaching you how to build the first steps in building a solar callus so that you can be a mammal that operates within your environment. Me knowing full well that most of you don't live in the environment that I'm in right now. You're afflicted by the other part that the leptin prescription never dealt with. Why? Because remember when I wrote it in 2005 to 2008. Okay. Melanopsin, we didn't find out about until 2017. I always knew there was an opsin involved in it, but I mistakenly thought it would be rhodopsin. I righted that wrong in 2017 on my Vermont talks. I told people this is the game changer. Now the leptin prescription makes total sense, which is part of the reason why Rick had me go and talk to Huberman to lay all this out so that people could understand how all these parts fit. The beautiful irony was, what am I telling you guys right now? I had enough pieces to the puzzle in 2005 to 2008 that I made educated guesses in the leptin prescription. And here I am now in 2024 telling you not one of those guesses were wrong. And do you know why they weren't wrong? It's not because I'm just a brilliant guy. It's actually because I followed the laws of nature. And the laws of nature do not fucking lie. Man lies, marketing lies, propaganda. Look, I'm just telling you right now, light and dark is the decentralized network where everything begins.
When it comes to cold, we're seeing like some people give some pushback to some cold therapy. And I think that there's a lot of baby talk in the fitness industry and people maybe don't understand what the cold is doing.
Do you know why? I mean, I'd like to hear your guys' perspective since there's three of you on the stage. Before I answer the question, tell me the reason why you think the pushback's there.
Well, the first reason I think is a lot of people have been doing cold therapy for a while in this industry. For like a few years, it's become somewhat of a trendy topic. Even though people are getting a lot of benefit from it, I love it. I've been doing cold therapy for a few years now, and it's something that's been consistent. Professionals, like for example, we heard a podcast where this guy, Dr. Mike, he has about 11 million subscribers on YouTube. He's a doctor. He was having a conversation with Lane Norton, and those two individuals were saying, it's trendy, people getting in chilly baths. It's not that beneficial. That's exactly what that doctor said. So I think one reason is because a lot of people are hopping on what we see now as the bandwagon.
And they thought it has something to do with like fat burning and things like that. So I think they're really missing the boat when it comes to the cold therapy.
Yeah, I think it's just a bunch of hipsters. Once they see something get trendy, they just want to hate on it, regardless of the information. And then the other one, which is very obvious, is that a lot of people just don't like being cold and they want to be comfortable all day long.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, it's interesting that I asked you to do this exercise because that's not my answer. My answer is the belief that people... or the people that I take care of, like we're talking elite NFL and NHL athletes, the reason they're getting pushed back on it now is because they believe it limits muscle hypertrophy after working out.
Yeah, we've heard that too.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you that the reason why I bring this up to you is remember how we started this podcast that I like to go after the meatheads, like Sean Baker, Paul Saladino, and all those cats, because they don't realize that there's a circadian negative effect from hypertrophied muscle. See, if you're a gorilla, you can go into a gym and build up your muscles really big. But if you're a human and do it, it makes no sense. Why? Because you don't have mitochondrial capacity in your muscle skeletal system. You have it here and in your heart. And this is the reason why, some of my former meathead friends who are now dead, and the same thing is happening now with, DeMar Hamlin, JJ Watt. Why are fit people dropping dead post-COVID? It goes to this topic. Energy is a zero-sum game. So you need to understand what the issue is with cold and what it does. And this goes back to what I said to Huberman and Rick, and hopefully you guys will give me some leeway here to understand it. I did a TED Talk in 2011 that basically got canned through State Board of Medicine, AMA, Big Pharma. I got interviewed by the CIA, FBI, and DARPA after this talk was given. Now, you may say back then, why did I face this kind of pushback? So what am I trying to tell you guys now in 2024? What if I was to tell you that the reason why the leptin trials were aborted by Amgen and Novo Nordisk is because they already knew what they were going to do for obesity? What if I told you that the GLP-1 drugs were already operational? That's the stuff you're dealing with now, Ozempic. Like, they don't want obesity to go away. They want to use it as a fucking annuity. So when I came out and gave this talk in Nashville, dude, they had to ban it right away. Why? Because it turns out when you learn how to use the sun in leptin-melanocortin pathway, and you learn how to use cold on the cold receptors that mammals have, and you can cogently explain it, bro, there's no need for GLP-1 drugs. There's no need for any of the drugs that are out there. And remember, why is the government complicit in this? Well, it goes back to the story, hopefully, that most of you know, why public education was innovated. It was innovated at a time in the Industrial Revolution, so you would create an obedient idiot that would follow everything the government told you, so you'd work in a factory for 8 to 12 hours a day, okay? The same thing is true today. people that are in the administration, I would say all the way from 1963 to current day, nobody gets a pass from me. They want us to be obedient idiots, so we follow the mandates they give us. You guys are the ones that just saw the last 3 years how that went. See, they went a little too far this time. Okay? And now people are beginning to realize, even the dumb bastards that have low agency and low dopamine, like maybe this wasn't such a good idea that we trust the experts that the government put in front of us. Why? Because remember, when you're an obedient idiot and you comply, you're much easier to control. That is the key. And that is the reason why they are complicit with Big Pharma. That's the reason why they've given Big Pharma the opportunity to advertise on TV. And where did the TV come into the story? What I'm trying to do for you is right now, Da Vinci Code, you put all the pieces together. Why is every screen blue lit? That came from the CIA and MK Ultra. I laid that out to Bobby Kennedy and Rick on the podcast. Why? Because anytime you have blue lit screens, your dopamine level goes down, you become easier to control. Okay? Everything here is about control. Everything here ultimately funnels down to money. And the reason I was banned is because this information that you have pathways in you that control this without the need for pharmaceutical drugs was a message that couldn't be tolerated. And to bring you guys to 2024, because I'm assuming none of you physicians, just like our friend said there about the physician that's got, 20 million people following? Just remember, just because 20 million idiots are following an idiot doesn't mean it's right. Just means the lie has been propagated. And what I'm here to tell you is Novo Nordisk right now makes more money from obesity in the United States. If you read their 10K report that just came out, they're going to start the same thing in Europe because it's been so successful. Why? Because they've got everybody who they control, FDA, CDC, every nutritionist, every dietitian, every hospital, no matter what, believing it's calories in, calories out.
Jack, a lot of pharmaceutical drugs are also like photosensitive as well. So you're talking about control, and that might be something that controls.
Just so you know, 75% of drugs in Big Pharma act on the circadian mechanism. They don't want you to know that because guess what? If you did, you know what I just told you about the leptin prescription and all the things I've written about? The fuck do you need them?
And a lot of these drugs might make it harder for someone to be able to deal with the sun. They might burn easier and stuff like that. And a lot of them are drugs that people take for mental illness, right?
Yeah, that's what sunglasses and sunscreen does. It actually sensitizes you more to the sun because it gets rid of melanin. It makes your skin atrophic. You know, I've talked to African Americans. They tell me all the time, well, bro, I go out in the sun, I get sunburned. And it tells me, see, melanin has to have its proper circadian biology in it. And I tell black people the same thing I tell white people. I said, go get in red light first, fix the problem with your skin, and then go there. And then, you know, other people, you guys probably have heard some of the podcasts I did with the Australian doctors when I blew their mind. And I told them, I said, look, people in Australia believe they're Australian. They're not fucking Australian. They're actually Northern Europeans that have a skin deficit and something called filigran that actually affects their ability to make melanin in their skin. That's why every woman from Australia is white and blue-eyed. I said, do they look like the people in the bush? No, they're not from there. It goes to our friend Zaragoza's comment about his mom. I want you guys to see there's a reason why this shit happens all over the world. In other words, I'm that fucking crazy talking, silly talking primate that wants to explain this to you so you get it. So you stop believing the bullshit artists that you have on podcasts. I would like to see some of you guys out some of these fuckers when you have them on the podcast because you know better than they do. Don't try to kiss their ass. And it really bothers me. Like the other gentleman that said about the doctor who was talking to Lane. Lane is a classic. He's just like you. He's another centralized guy. And every so often, like a clock, twice a day, he gets something right. Like I agree with him about the seed oil problem. I don't think it's as big a deal as everybody else thinks. But do I still think you should avoid it? Yeah, especially when you're circadian mismatched. But I think that argument has been championed by the food gurus because they don't really understand light. We need more light gurus than food gurus. And it goes to what I'm trying to tell you guys right now. that you have to vet your experts. You have to find out who packs your parachute and go from there. And I try to tell everybody, don't believe a damn thing I say. Read the sites in my blogs. Read where these ideas came from. I mean, if you don't follow me on Twitter, dude, my Twitter feed is like a decentralized textbook for biology. I mean, I'm not, telling you and showing you pictures of my fucking cat. I'm actually teaching you what you need to know. I'm not talking to you about Dogecoin or something else. I'm teaching you how to stay away from the sausage grinder that is American healthcare. And I want people, and I like to highlight people that I think are doing it right. Erwin LaCour, to me, he's the one guy in the movement fitness business that gets it right. Bobby Kennedy, because of Bitcoin and medical freedoms. Nayib Bukele, for the same reason. But they're putting actions behind what they're doing. I can't get behind Biden. Biden is best friends with Big Pharma. And I hate to say this, but Trump the same way. I mean, Operation Warp Speed wasn't on Biden. It was on fucking Trump. And, a lot of my friends that like Trump, they get really pissed off at me when I say this. I'm sorry. I mean, he was just on with Martha Ingram and said, he goes, I'm not really a fan of Bitcoin when it's compared to fiat. Well, dude, if that doesn't tell you that he's a fucking moron, I don't think anything else will. Because Bukele said the exact opposite last night. And when you begin to realize and you pull the screen back from the wizard, that's the point that I'm trying to make to you guys. I want you to understand, evaluate the people you respect from how they think. Neither of you three, I don't care if you fucking like me or not. I really don't care. But you know what I'm going to demand from all of you? You're going to respect what I'm saying. You are going to read and you're going to look at it and say, son of a bitch, this is really, really different. And you know what? It's different than what we've been told. And maybe I'm going to try some of this. Maybe I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And when Zaragoza gives us the analogy of his mom, look, from that anecdote, really good data comes. It's the same thing that happens in MS. It's the same thing that happens in vitamin D. It's the same thing that happens in ALS. People know that those links are there, but they kind of don't know why. They don't know why you get more autoimmune disease the further you get away from the equator, but everybody knows it's true. It's kind of like, I'm not okay not knowing. I'm that guy that I'm going to pick it apart and I'm going to try to figure it out and I'm going to share it with my audience. The problem is I'd love to share it with my audience without being unencumbered, but I have to put it behind a paywall because of the guys that I told you came after me 20 years ago. I mean, to this very day, I'm spending money with lawyers, still fighting those fuckers off. So I want you to understand that this information, this is free, it's decentralized, the laws of nature, and the paradigm that's in power is trying to keep you from that basic information. That is the reason why dermatology and Bill Gates are fundamentally selling the same story, that blocking the sun is wise. That should get every single person that listens to this podcast really thinking, yeah, I never thought about that. Why are these two related? And why is all of a sudden, like for you food guru dudes out there, do you understand now why Bill Gates is buying farmland everywhere? Do you get it yet? Because when you block the sun, then the next thing, how do you control people? Control their food. It's a story as old as human history.
How powerful is blue light? Because I heard you on a podcast talk about blue light maybe being a driver of transgender.
Yeah, well, that's the stuff that hit the editing floor on the Rubin podcast. Most people don't know that AM sunlight, it has balance blue and red, but blue light actually has a huge effect on the hypothalamic neurons that controls your sex drive. The bottom line is they need an off switch. What's the off switch? Red light is the off switch, but the other off switch is UV light. Most people don't even know that sex steroid hormones are disrupted by UV light. So I want you to think about like the guys that you may have on here that are, have 20 million followers selling people the idea that putting testosterone gel on their body is a fucking good idea and then telling them to go outside and work in the sun. It's the stupidest fucking thing ever. But, you know, literally, if you read one or two papers, you'd know that. But guess what? I guarantee there's going to be people listening to this podcast go, I didn't know that. You know why? Because they're blocking you from that information. But it turns out that is exactly the reason why women get triple negative breast cancer. It's the reason why guys who have darker skin get prostate cancer way more. You need to realize how all these things work together. And when you see it for yourself, it's really hard to go back to sleep. It's really difficult. And if you want to know the truth, I always tell people when I come on podcasts, I'm really speaking to about 5 or 6 people in your audience. Half the time I'm talking through you guys, going right to your audience, because I'm looking for those 5 people that say, bro, this makes a lot of sense. I need to go read some of the papers that he's talking about, but there's too much in centralized medicine. There's too much in the healthcare fitness business that just doesn't make sense. And I think it's the mark of an educated mind that you take something you fundamentally don't believe and you examine it for yourself and you go for it. Like the doctor that's got 20 million followers, that doesn't impress me, bro. You know, influencers don't impress me. If you want to know the truth, at Maria Menounos' podcast, I got sacked by some of her very influential friends, Kim Kardashian, after it. And I basically told her to go fuck herself. Why? Because she is part of the problem. Okay? And her sisters are part of the problem. They are selling people ideas that are going to wind up where Zaragoza's mom is or where some of your people are. Women don't even know the makeup that are being sold has all UV blockers in it. What do you think that does to their hormones? What do you think that does to the transgenerational switches? I'll ask Zaragoza this. What do you think that may have had to do when I just told Zaragoza that the skin clock genes control your GI gut and his mom died of stomach cancer? Yeah, I'm telling Zaragoza that the makeup that his mother wore when she left Mexico, because most Mexican women who grew up 50, 60 years ago, they couldn't fucking afford makeup anyway. They were naturally beautiful. You only need makeup because you're an ugly bastard because you live in fake light. That's the truth. I mean, we see that. If you guys don't believe it, we see that in the Roman statues, in the Greek statues. I mean, did David look like a bad dude from Michelangelo? You know, have you looked in Western A. Price's book? Those savages that were in there? The one thing that, you know, Sally Fallon and the Western A. Price guys keep shitting the bed on, every single fucking picture in his book. Where were the guys? They were outside in the sun. They weren't fucking sitting in a cafeteria in Boston jerking each other off. But guess what? That's not the story Western A. Price wants to sell. They want to sell you raw cream and grass-fed eggs and all kinds of other bullshit. No, I'm not going there.
I've heard that in France, they the way that they get female eggs is to use blue light. Have you heard about it? So it can be a driver of really profound things, right?
Well, I mean, think about what you just said. That should scare the shit out of everybody. I mean, you just basically said, hey, Jack, we can drive transgenderism in chicken eggs with light. Well, why the fuck? Isn't this the same story that I just said to Zaragoza 40 minutes ago? If you can do it in your mom in a cactus tree from the Sonoran Desert, why the hell can't you do it in chickens and humans? Dude, remember, melanopsin is everywhere in the animal kingdom. People don't realize. Do you guys remember, and I'm assuming that you listened to the Huberman podcast, do you remember the second part when he was wearing the shirt about the octopus? And I picked up on that and I went with it. He doesn't even know that cephalopods were one of the first animals that were innovated after Cambrian explosion. And where their melanin was, they spit it out of their body in ink. They had melanopsin in them. And he studies them because that's human brain 1.0 compared to us. You go into his lab, you see the light show in the octopus. You don't see that when I open someone's head up. But rest assured, that's actually what's going on, except we conserve the light. We also are using the melanin instead of spitting it out. That's the change that's made between 600 million years ago and now. So when you realize that melanopsin is probably the number one non-visual photoreceptor in mammals, that means when you go from the mammals that became us after the KT event, and I want to make sure you guys get this loud and clear, mammals have been on Earth 300 million years. They came from amphibians. Amphibians or where the cephalopods came from. So it makes total sense why melanopsin would be in us, unlike what Huberman said on the podcast. Like, it shocked even the guy that found this out. His name is Burson. He goes, can you believe that we have fucking amphibian blue light detectors in our brain? And I'm sitting there when he said it, and I'm going, you really don't know where we came from. So he's announcing the ignorance, but the thing that I have to point out to guys like you guys didn't know it either, did you? Guess what? That's the reason why mistakes are made. So the point that I'm trying to make to you is realize that from that KT event 65 million years ago, we came from these small little creatures that live under the ground. You know where we're at now. We're supposed to be the latest mammal. What has really happened? Two things. We use more blue light detection for our non-visual photoreceptive system, and we use melanin to the nth degree. In fact, we are the one mammal that uses melanin in the most amazing ways to do the things we did. That's how we sculpted our body from chimp, okay? And it happened really fast. That's how powerful melanin is. And we went all the way from spitting our melanin out as a cephalopod to keeping it inside our brain to make us who we are so that we could have this discussion today. And it's imperative for me to get the message to you guys that this whole melanopsin thing, when you hear me say at all the talks I do, that blue light is the number one non-native EMF that's killing us, I'm going to tell you that underpins the majority of the chronic diseases that are present in humans today. Can you still live in that environment? Think about where you guys are right now and think about where I am right now. We doing this different, aren't we? Why am I doing it? I'm 60 years old. You guys, I'm assuming, are a lot younger than me. You are trading more time for money than me. I can't do that anymore. When I'm getting to the point where, you know, my heteroplasmy rate's going to get to a certain level, and, you know, nature's going to stick socks in my mouth and shut me up and put me under the ground. My duty, because I made mistakes from the time I was 0 to 40 years old. I was a centralized doctor that pushed the narrative that I'm trying to blow up now. I have a duty to the people that I hurt. I have a duty to the audience. I have a duty to tell them what I found. Because if I don't tell them before I'm dead, the Library of Alexandria Quantum Biology, my little piece, my little part, dies with me.
At this point, nasal breathing while you're asleep is no longer something that just us bros do, but people are realizing that it can make a big difference in your sleep quality, your recovery, and all aspects of sleep. That's why hostage tape is so important, because many people have their mouths drop open while they're asleep, they're snoring, and that really affects the quality of their sleep. And that's why many wake up groggy and not feeling extremely rested. Hostage tape will allow you to tape your mouth shut even if you have a beard. Us bearded folks can put the tape on and can be confident enough that when you wake up in the morning, the tape will still be on your mouth, which will help you breathe through your nose. And they also have nose strips if you're someone who struggles breathing through the nose. Those nose strips will help you open up your airway and breathe a little bit easier while you're asleep. How can they get their hands on some hostage tape?
Yeah, you guys can head over to hostagetape.com/powerproject, where you guys can receive mouth tape and nose strips for an entire year for less than $1 a night. Again, hostagetape.com/powerproject. Links down in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
You know, Jack, you mentioned that you're in your 60s now, right? And something that is extremely popular is, as men get older these days, is testosterone replacement therapy, replacing something that, you know, their body makes. But I also heard you mention on another podcast, the Rubin podcast, you were warning people against even vitamin D and melatonin supplementation, things that the body makes. So why should people be wary about whether it is something like TRT or vitamin D or melatonin or anything supplementing things like that? What should they be careful about?
Yeah, this is a really good question, but it's nuanced, my answer. I'm going to tell you, for certain people, I'm okay with, and for most people, I'm not. So with you specifically, since the guy, I guess, in the middle is the one that told me you're the Black Knight of the gym and all that, realize that when guys hit andropause, okay, and that's different for everybody, what is andropause functionally a measure of in evolutionary biology? it's designed to diminish the muscle skeletal mass so that you can preserve it for the brain and the heart. So if you have a patient in front of you who actually has, say, higher heteroplasmy in their heart and their brain, do you think it would be a good or bad idea to put that person on testosterone? It would be a bad idea. Now, the flip side is, say somebody doesn't have any heart disease, say they had a calcium index score that was 0, say they have excellent cognitive function on the tests that you put them on, you do an MRI of their brain and find out they have no atrophy, and you find out that the guy's testosterone level is 250, and he wants to have more energy, more better cognition, whatever the reason, even if it's sexual functioning, I probably wouldn't go to T, because I don't think T really plays a big role in your sexual functioning. That guy would be okay using it, but I'd watch him. And the key metric that I'd watch him is going to be what happens with his hemoglobin and hematocrit. I'm going to look at his blood viscosity. I'm going to look at his cardiac function going forward. When those things start to change, then I'm going to pull back the reins. But that's not what happens with the longevity doctors. The guys that like work out in Las Vegas, the Cenogenics guy, you come in, you get 1 day of test, they put you on testosterone or growth hormone the rest of your life, and they fucking cut you loose. Wrong answer, bro. You need to be watched really carefully when you're on it. Corollary, because we never talk about the ladies. Ladies the same way. Are there people that I'm okay with bioidentical hormone replacement? The answer is yes, but they got to go through my decentralized gauntlet before I give them the stamp. For most people that are going to listen to this podcast, I'm going to tell you, no, it's a really bad idea to take something exogenally your body makes. Why? Because if you understand what we're talking about in circadian biology, everything is based on a coupled system. We have a positive and negative feedback loop. The basic one in biology is light and dark. So if you take, for example, we'll just use the one that you use because it's so abused right now, melatonin. Pediatricians are putting kids on melatonin at record rates. What they don't realize, they're preconditioning these kids for acute macular degeneration, thinning retinas, and early cataracts by the time they're 30 and 40 years old. Now, none of them know that because pediatricians, they're usually the bottom of the medical class. They don't read outside of their specialty, and they have no earthly idea that these papers are written in the ophthalmology literature. Sad thing, ophthalmologists tend to be at the top of the medical class, and they don't read it either. How do you like that? So the reason they don't read it is a different reason, because they want people to get retinal diseases. They want people to have bad eyes. Why? Because that's how they make their Mercedes payments, and that's how they live the nicest houses in the neighborhood. Now, they don't want you to know that. And some of them will tell you, no, that's not really how it happens. But when you funnel it basically down, when you block light from the eyes or the skin, basically you create rich dermatologists and rich ophthalmologists. You do the same thing with neurosurgeons. If I can get people to block the sun, the number one cancer they're going to get is GBM. That's what Ted Kennedy died from. That's what John McCain died from. Just remember what he also died from, or he had melanoma. He was white. He always blocked the sun. People don't even realize that gliomas have a tight linkage with low vitamin D status. But do neurosurgeons tell patients this to go out in the sun? I think I'm about the only neurosurgeon that I know. I know a lot of my friends are neurosurgeons. When I show them the paper, they're like, bro, I didn't learn this. And I was like, of course you didn't learn it. I didn't learn it either. But it's true. And there's like 19 papers that back it up. So then I say to them, what are you going to tell your GBM patients? Are you going to tell them, to put Gliadel wafers in their head versus, doing something else? And, to your point, those people that have those type of tumors, those are the people I'd consider putting on vitamin D supplementation. Why? Because that's a totally different situation when I kind of know what's going on with them. So my position on this is very nuanced. And you have to realize I'm not that, general asshole that comes on a podcast and tells you what I would do for all comers that walk into my clinic. I'm telling you what I would do for a patient that has a specific mitochondrial disease is different than, say, what I would do to a 25-year-old that is interested in longevity and owns Bitcoin and wants to live long enough so that he can spend all his Bitcoin and do the things he wants. That is a totally different N equals 1. And as I told you guys in the beginning of this podcast, I have a duty to my patients. Like when I enter into a covenant with you, dude, there's a lot of informed consent that goes down.
When with us, we get blood work done and things like that, but we're meatheads, so we can't really be creative enough to think outside the box on some other tests that we should get done. You have any recommendations for somebody that wants to maybe amplify their performance on particular tests that they should maybe get?
Yeah, I would tell you, let's talk about Lance Armstrong, since he's the most famous blood doper, of our generation. The best way to blood dope is with red light, photobiomodulation. It's huge. I'm going to tell you sunlight's even better. Highest performance in the world are the guys that are going to be naked. So, you've probably heard me on other podcasts. I talk about Michael Phelps and Usain Bolt. And people thought it was a joke until they fact checked me. Usain Bolt ran at the 20th North latitude in skivvies on a volcano and ate chicken fucking McNuggets and won 5 gold medals. So for the meatheads in the gym that tell you, you need to take this stack and you need to eat this tomahawk and you need to do this and that, Usain Bolt is fucking laughing at you clowns. And I know that you clowns have 20 million followers like that stupid ass doctor you talked to me about earlier. But that's okay, because guess what? Evolution tells us that certain people need to be extinguished. I'm perfectly fine with that. Why? I think improving the gene pool is what I try to do through podcasts. I want you to know that I'm not everybody's cup of tea, nor do I want to be. See, that's what makes me different than Kim Kardashian or Peter Attia. I don't want everybody, because I know not everybody's going to get the fundamentals that are tied to nature. Now, do I have a problem with some of the people that you guys may support, like the Sean Bakers of the world or the Paul Saladinos? No, because I think they're doing enough for people that are taking people that are, in the boiling water and making them better. Yeah. The problem is they're not smart enough to tell people what the next step is after them. Like when you hit that plateau where you start to have a problem, like for example, I'm not going to mention this name, but there's a famous guy out there that's written tons of books, that are New York Times bestseller. And you see the guy on pictures and he shows you he looks great, but he's got 2 autoimmune diseases. And he never fucking tells you any of that shit. And, I'm not going to be the douchebag to out this guy, but I really think, from my perspective as a decentralized physician, that you got to know what somebody's skin in the game is. I tell people all the time, you may not like the way my body looks. That's fine. But I'm 60 years old and I don't take any medicines. I'll let you talk to my girlfriend and see if I have any issues in the bedroom. I'll let you check my blood pressure anytime you want. Bro, I'm living, walking, and talking. The mistake that I make is that I'm still having to work a part of the time to pay my legal bills to fight the battle that I'm fighting with you guys right now, to go after the paradigm. You guys don't understand how difficult it is to go through 20 years in centralized medicine being the fucking salmon swimming upstream. You have no fucking earthly idea. But guess what? Does it stop me? Does it look like it's stopping me? Am I here talking to you about it? Am I on every podcast talking about it? Do I make any apologies about it? No. Do I know there's parts of me that I'm sacrificing? My kids have even told me that. Dad, after the Huberman podcast, after I went on with Bobby Kennedy, like, bro, you're putting a fucking target on yourself. Guess what? I think it's that important, because I think the sausage grinder that you young guys are facing, that Zaragoza's mom's already faced, if not me, who? Who's going to tell you the truth? And remember, guys, I don't know how much you know about me. You had Herrera on. Do I sell any supplements? Do I sell anything except information? I'm guilty of that. My Patreon costs $5 a month. It's not 50. It's not 100. It's $5. So if I'm not worth a cup of coffee a month, then you've told me truly how you value yourself. Because I can tell you, what I'm going to tell you is not what Peter Attia is going to tell you, not what Dave Asprey is going to tell you, certainly not what Sean Baker is going to tell you. Now, Paul Saladino is waking up. He's gone to Costa Rica. starting to eat fruit, even though he made his millions selling a fucking carnivore book. Lane wants to make fun of him, but Lane is a fucking centralized shill too. I mean, let's call it as it is. He cherry picks data more than anybody I fucking know. But bro, I'm a capitalist. I believe that even if you sell people bullshit, I support your right to do that. But don't think I'm not coming on a fucking podcast like a great white shark and going to make you my little baby seal. Because I'm going to tell people the truth. Why? Because I went to medical school and I took an oath to do no harm. When I think I know better than most of the dominant paradigm that's out there, I will continue to come on podcasts when I'm inviting and give you my perspective.
Jack, I'm really curious about, and I think you did mention it earlier in this podcast, about how, longer lived people are generally smaller. And we see that. Even my grandma lived to 100 years old. And she was a very small woman, right? But I am wondering, younger people have an easier ability to gain muscle. And as you get older, it gets a little bit harder. But why shouldn't we take the time to strengthen our bodies so that as we get older, we can maintain that strength until old age, so that, when you fall, you don't break a bone because you have low bone density because your body's weak. I'm not saying that everyone needs to be a large bodybuilder.
I agree. I agree the nuance, but this is the things that I have to tell you.
Okay.
Because I know you don't have this experience. I see people all the time that have really big muscles that have horrible bone densities. So realize something. Orthopedic surgeons believe in Wolff's Law. Wolff's Law now on the surface of the earth is no longer true because of non-native EMF. That's what you don't understand. So do you think that some of the fragility fractures can happen in some of those guys? You remember, I think it was about 10, 15 years ago when the Rob Wolf guys were really big in paleo, and they had this guy that was a CrossFitter who lifted a step in the spine and became paralyzed. Remember that?
No.
And everybody was like, bro, how the fuck did this happen? Turns out he had osteoporosis, but yet he had huge muscles. That's something that orthopedists are told is impossible. And guess what you'll find out now? It's actually much more common with guys who have your beliefs.
Okay.
I was just going to finish it up and tell you that most people believe that your muscle mass and bone density are linked. I'm going to tell you today, this is the first time in human history they're not.
What about strength?
Strength, but the guy that I was going to bring up next, because you said you guys had him on the podcast, I don't know if he told you the truth. Dave Herrera has listened to a lot of things I did. As he got smaller, he got stronger. He goes, I can lift now more because of the things that you're telling me to do. So the guy that's on the stage, I guess he was the Black Knight that was asking me these questions, because he's asking me great questions. I'd really like him to call Dave Herrera up after this podcast and say, Dave, talk to me, Goose. How did you maintain your strength? And you're going to find out that it was light and dark cycles and cold. And Herrera is really, really, because when he came to me, he didn't believe anything that I said. And then he tried it and he was like, holy shit. And he said, so this is that superhuman pathway that you talked about way back in the band TED Talk, the Sherpa pathway. I said, yeah, nobody in the fitness community wants to talk about the Sherpas. These guys carry over their body weight. They go up to the Himalaya mountains and they rescue Europeans that can't fucking make it. And, the question that this young man just brought up, it's exactly the same question. But you don't realize, because you haven't turned it around. How can a Sherpa do what it does, but you think you need to go to the gym and hypertrophy your muscles to do the same thing? And I mentioned the guy, Erwin LaCour. You look at Erwin LaCour, he doesn't look like, the Sean Bakers of the world. But if I put Sean Baker and Erwin LaCour, say, in the Cerro Verde volcano here in El Salvador and ask him to move through nature, Sean Baker would fracture his fucking tibia. Erwin LaCour would probably be in Zaragoza calling the hospital on his behalf. And see, that's the questions that I want you guys to ask. See, what you value, and you don't realize it's an ideology, just like, a political ideology. When you go to the gym or you're doing TRT or you're listening to the guys with certain stocks, you don't even realize that it's an ideology. You actually think it's biology, and it's not. It's like a journalist that's down here with Bukele that's talking shit about him, but they're paid by Soros. And the public doesn't know that. And you're getting a really bad message. And I want you to begin to ask that question, because the reason I respect a guy like Dave Herrera, he actually has come and met me in El Salvador. And he said to me, Jack, I need to tell you, I didn't believe anything you told me. And then I decided to do something that I normally didn't do. And I found out it was true. And he goes, many of the things I found out are true. He goes, some of the things that I'm even doing in my own business, he goes, now I'm questioning it. And I said to him, I said, you know what, dude? I'll always be a friend of yours because you're telling the truth now. Like, I'm okay that he's making money off people that really don't want to jump down this rabbit hole as deeply as we're jumping down it right now. And you want to know how Jack feels about this? I'm okay with those people being harmed. You know why? Because they didn't do the hard work of thinking. You know, if you want to buy the melatonin, you want to take the TRT, and you don't want to go deeper and find out, is this right for me? Then you fucking deserve what nature is going to hand out to you. Because guess what? I learned that lesson, not in medical school. Doctors that are listening to this probably hate the message I'm giving you guys right now. I learned this from evolution. That's why we have extinction events. That's why certain animals don't make it. Okay? That's why I'm not everybody's cup of tea. And I'll run away from it. But if you're interested in this idea, you're going to find out that everything that I believe is not new. It's based on nature's laws. The only thing that I've done is put it all together. That's it.
Cold produces light inside the body. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. I mean, every time a mammal's in cold, it changes your metabolism in your mitochondria. When your metabolism changes, you emit different frequencies of light. How do we know that? There's a book out there where you can fact check Uncle Jack's called Roland Van Wyck is the author. It's called Light Sculpts Life. You'll find out that different light frequencies are released from tissues. Who is the guy that originally proved it? His name is Alexander Gurwitch. That was the famous onion root experiment that I talked to Huberman about that he didn't know anything about. Then I followed that up, jumped 40 years ahead of that, right around 1957, when Becker found the same thing true to be in bone, in human bone, that we emit red light. It's kind of like brown red light from stress, like the gentleman was talking to me about before about big muscles. The problem is when an orthopedic surgeon sees a bone at the time of surgery, he never sees the red light. Why? Because the light is conserved because the current is rectified by two copper atoms that are in the apatite of bone. But does any orthopedic surgeon learn about what I just told you? No. Big Pharma made sure that all of Becker's work was buried. And the government actually backed that up in 1973 when they basically eliminated his lab when he went on 60 Minutes to tell people that non-native EMF was going to cause a humongous problem in the future. He went on 60 Minutes. I'm trying to remember the dude's name. It wasn't Dan Rather. It was, Yeah, maybe it was Doug Wallace. And he told the world the truth. And literally 2 weeks later, they defunded us. He was the smartest guy in the 20th century in biology. And people have ignored him at their risk. But yes, temperature change biophoton release from mitochondrial metabolism. That is absolutely true. And when you have guys on this podcast in the future that tell you cold has no benefit for mammals, you should bitch slap them and never invite them back on your podcast. They are fundamentally pseudoscientific in their beliefs.
I have a closing question, but either one of you guys have another question to ask him?
I have a pretty elementary level one. Because some of the stuff we're talking about, humans, we can't really look in the future very well. You know, things are, they hit us better when it's the here and now. I'm curious if you can tell us what something like an iPhone is doing to us when we're carrying it in our pocket every single day.
I want you to think, I'm going to give you something that is in your consciousness. I want you to think about August 5th and 6th, 1945. You're Japanese and you're in Hiroshima. On the 5th, it's a beautiful sunny day. You're living your life like you have no worries. The next day, an atomic explosion happens over your head. 200,000 of your countrymen are incinerated right away. And then decades after that, there's collateral effects that you can measure and scientists have measured. When Apple made their AirPods, their iPads, their earplugs, their new VR glasses, and the iPhone, that was 1 million times worse than the atomic bomb that happened in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. And each one of you don't know that. You think what I just told you is hyperbole, but I'm going to tell you that every single chronic disease, including the one that your mother succumbed from, is linked to our tech abuse, our screen abuse, and the fact that we can't get away from it. And the smartest people who listen to this podcast are going to realize that you don't need to go on a food diet. You need to go on a tech diet. You do that, you will live long. You won't live as long as Gene Calmet. I don't think our generation, and when I say our, I'm including you in it. You're a different generation than me. I don't think we're going to live as long. The data is already out there that, human longevity has taken a significant downturn, since the 90s, especially if you live in a city, but nobody wants to talk about that. And I think the thing that we're starting to find out from like the Damar Hamlins, the JJ Watts, the Poliquins, the more you embrace blue lit gyms and bigger muscles, the more you're going to die. The more you get jabbed, the more fit you are, you're going to die sooner. Why? Because you're stealing energy to the wrong tissues. And people don't get it. It's always about energy. It's not about anything else. It's a thermodynamic argument. And because we've built a world, which gets to our Black Knight's friend's original question, I never really answered him. Why is the world killing us? It's because it's stealing energy from us faster ever before through man-made devices that we've built. It goes to the Simon and Garfunkel song that you guys probably don't know about. Maybe you heard the Disturbed version of it. We built neon lights and we started to fucking worship them. And guess what? That's our asteroid, boys. And my job, until I die, is to get to people to understand this very counterintuitive perspective. That's something that can allow you three guys to connect with me in El Salvador and share this information with people is somehow at its very core rotten to the apple. That's my perspective. And your question wasn't simple. Just so you know, in this whole podcast, you've asked two of the best questions.
I was actually curious to know about like your what time of the day that you believe cold is more effective, if there's a time of day, and how you use it.
Yeah, I would tell you that's a great question. My answer on this one is changed. I'm going to tell you all parts of the day are good, but the best time I think is actually probably right before you go to bed.
Wow.
And the reason why is because it's a boost to autophagy and what really is going on when you go to sleep. That's when you're fixing all the repair of the damage that goes away. The way I want you to think about this, guys, and this may be a good place to end. When we live in the morning, the sunrise is the default set that gets all our TCA cycles spinning the same way for the same direction. Okay. The process of living life, say to sunset, is all those TCA cycles are spinning in different directions in different tissues. Okay. In other words, your muscles, your bones, your brain, your vessels, they're all different because of the environment you're in or the activities you're doing. What happens at night is the light that's created from your mitochondrial metabolism drives mostly autophagy. It also will affect apoptosis, but apoptosis is really effective more in the day where you take out defective engines. So when you understand this perspective, using cold will actually give you a jump start, a boost towards that process of sleep. But I don't want anybody to think that AM sunlight is somehow trumped by cold, because it's not. Nothing. If there's one thing I can tell you, axiomatically true, the most important thing in health is getting sunlight in the morning. The second most important thing is making sure it's pitch black at night. Those two things, bro, that's like a quarter. That's the heads and tails. You got to get those right. Everything else is superfluous. I mean, we can sit and talk about the other stuff, but I think your question about the use of cold before sleep, I think that's the best time to use it if you're living the modern life. But I don't want anybody who's a newbie to think that you can't use cold all the time. I think you can. And I think the more you abuse blue light and non-native EMF, you need to use it even more. That I will say. You didn't ask me that question, but I'm going to throw you those nickels and dimes so you get it. And I want you to understand why I'm saying it. The same thing is true with if you abuse technology, I want you to get more AM sunlight. Like, people on social media always ask me, Jack, how much light do you want to get in the morning? And I'm like, tell me how big of an abuser you are. Are you in the casino, at 5 a.m. and you stay there forever and ever and ever? Bro, then you need it like you can't imagine. But like, not everybody is the same, and we act like when we do podcasts or we see people or you guys read blogs, we act like everybody's the same. Nobody's the same. Everybody's an N equals 1. And that's why I think when you read my blogs, I'm really talking to a specific audience. I'm talking to people that already have mitochondrial issues, meaning they have some age to them. They've got heteroplasmy rates that are higher than normal. When I talk to people who are young people who assume that they still have heteroplasmy rates in all their tissues that act their age, that's a different argument completely. And that nuance is very rarely delivered in a podcast. And I think it's really important to deliver it, because that's the reason why, some people will say, well, Jack said he'd use vitamin D in someone with a GBM, but he wouldn't do it in me. Why is that? Well, if you're an Amish guy that lives in Pennsylvania and you have no electric power, the chance of you getting a GBM is next to nothing, even if your vitamin D level is low. What I would tell you, hey, bro, can you go out in the backyard, take your clothes off, and do un-Amish things, kind of like the cows do? I've had Amish people be my members. I said, you guys are really big into the old school way of things. Well, look at the cows in the back. Look at your horses. You don't fucking have blankets on them. I said, why does you and your wife have? And when you make that point to them, they go, yeah, it's basically comes down to our socialization, our ideologic beliefs that are tied to our religious beliefs. I said, okay, how about we talk about those? Because that's really where the biology comes. Or same thing is true with the people in the Middle East. Why the people right now who wear rags on their head and rags all over their body have some of the highest rates of diabetes in the world? Let's talk about that. I've told people on multiple podcasts, there's a reason why Arabian people only let their women's eyes out, because they can control them a lot better.
A constant thing that's been beneficial for all of our health has been intaking enough protein, but also intaking quality protein. And that's why we've been partnering with Good Life Proteins for years now. Good Life not only sells Piedmontese beef, which is our favorite beef, and the main reason why it's our favorite is because they have cuts of meat that have higher fat content, like their ribeyes and their chuck eyes, but they also have cuts of meat like their flat iron. Andrew, what's the macros on the flat iron?
Yeah, dude. So the flat iron has 23 grams of protein, only 2 grams of fat. But check this out. Their grass-fed sirloin essentially has no fat and 27 grams of protein.
There we go. So whether you're dieting and you want lower fat cuts or higher fat cuts, that's there. But you can also get yourself chicken. You can get yourself fish. You can get yourself scallops. You can get yourself all types of different meats. And I really suggest going to Good Life and venturing in and maybe playing around with your proteins. I mean, going back to the red meat, there's picanha.
There's all kinds of stuff.
Chorizo sausage. There's maple bacon.
That stuff's incredible.
The maple bacon is so good.
Maple bacon's really good.
Yo, my girl put those in these bell peppers with a steak and chicken. And oh my God, it was so good. But either way, guys, protein is essential. And the Good Life is the place where you can get all of your high quality proteins. So Andrew, how can they get it?
Yes, you can head over to goodlifeproteins.com and enter promo code PowerProject to save 20% off your entire order. Links in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
How do we make this podcast better? Right now we're indoors and we're sitting under some blue light. And so I wanted to see if you had a couple suggestions, because we're going to adopt a lot of the things that you mentioned here today.
Take a look, guys. I have grass on my roof. You're on the roof of my house. See over here? That's one of my members sitting right there. That's the Pacific Ocean right there. I don't know if you can see it. So those are volcanoes behind me. You see that? Right? I'm going to point to it. That is the San Salvador volcano. Huge magnetic flux. So how can you improve it? Come by the lot right next to me, build a house right there, get on the roof, and start doing podcasts like this. And I would even tell you, even when it's cold, I don't know where you guys are, do them outside. Do them outside. And you know what you do? If you can't stay out long enough, that's cool. Then make your podcast 30 minutes and then do multiple ones with people. Have them come back more frequently instead of staying on there and radiating your brains with the shit that you guys are radiating your brains with. I mean, ultimately, you're trying to get good information out to people. I would think that you want to take care of things. And, you happen to have one guy in your podcast that just went through some tragedy with his mom. Like, that's reality for him. And remember, he got his mitochondrial DNA from that lady. This fucking guy needs to worry about more about what I said than you two up there. You haven't told me anything about your mom, but I know what happened to his mom. He needs to worry about that because he's got his mom's engines in him. So if you want to know the truth, he's got the one that I'm probably the most worried about.
What about having just like a red light or something to kind of offset some of this? I understand what you're saying, but is there?
I'm going to tell you, you know what that's like? That's like taking a Cialis and thinking your sex life's going to be good. It's just not good enough. Now, am I going to tell you, is it an upgrade to probably where you're at now? I don't know if you guys have red light. I told you everything's black, so I can't really tell. But yeah, if you don't have a red light, if you don't have a UVA light, you could add those. That's cool. But I really think you guys need to look at how much tech time you spend, and then that's what you need to do. You need to add the light back in. And it doesn't matter if it's cloudy out or not. It's still sunlight. You're still getting the right frequency through there. And don't be afraid about taking your clothes off. Like, go to the gym in fucking skivvies. But ask them to turn lights off, or join a gym that's got a fucking garage door that they'll open it to the outside. Like, you have a choice to where you spend your money. And if the gym owner thinks that your ideas are fucking crazy, then say, bro, I'm not giving you money if you're ultimately going to harm me. Build your own fucking gym. Get together with your boys and do it outside. I'm trying to tell you, when I got this house, I've only done 3 or 4 podcasts from the roof. And my goal is to do all my podcasts from the roof. Now, you can do the podcast in my house because I have no walls in my house. Technically, the outside is inside. This house is spectacular in terms of its design. But I think I want to do them up here because if you think about the discussion that we had today, you begin to realize how really important light truly is to us. And the more of it I can get here, the more that I can transfer my information to you guys so that when I'm dead, maybe one of you, maybe Zaragoza says, bro, I got this. We're going to change the mix. What happened to my mom's not going to happen to anybody else. I didn't know that the skin biology controls the clocks that were in her gut lining. I did not know that. You know what? I feel good if I gave that information to Zaragoza. Why? Because wounds create your wisdom. He had to lose his mom, but he learned something very powerful. And the shocking thing, so I want everybody in the audience to realize that wisdom was built in a leptin prescription that I wrote 20 years ago. Don't tell me that I wouldn't tell you the truth the whole way. No, I wasn't selling you a fucking carnivore book or this book or that book. I've been telling you the truth. The leptin prescription is on my website for free. You can download it right now, no charge. It's the basis of everything you need to do. Now, you want to know some of the science behind it, the decentralized stuff? And then I'm going to have to split your head open a little bit. You're going to have to spend a little time with Uncle Jack. There's going to be things that I say to you that you're probably not going to like. But guess what? I'm not telling you because I don't care about you. In fact, Chantel has told me that I spend time doing stuff like this because I care too much. But a lot of people would find that counterintuitive because of my attitude on a lot of podcasts. There's a reason I do this. Big part of my medical life, I didn't tell people the truth because I wasn't taught the truth. And I'm not giving myself a pass on that. I'm telling you that I have to get that right. That's why I do what I do.
What's the deal with this tablet that you have that doesn't have any blue light?
Yeah, and when you see it for yourself, you know, people are like, oh, I bet you it has horrible refresh rate. You can't see videos. Bro, when you guys watch this, you're like, holy shit. It's amazing. It has no blue light at all. You can even use it at night. You can use it in direct sunlight. I mean, I had I think it was a Instagram or Facebook post when I first got it. I was in the pool downstairs in, you know, solar noon light, which you guys know, I told you I can't see shit on this computer now.
Right.
That computer, you can see everything. It's like shocking. But see, those are the kind of cool things, you know, Anjan Kata, who's the kid that made this, he made that because he was my member 7 years ago. His dad is a physician. His dad's a psychiatrist. His dad didn't believe a lot of the stuff that I saw. Then Anjan tried to kill himself. And then his dad started to fucking wake up. And then I told Anjan, I said, you need to build a computer so that your generation won't fucking kill themselves. And I told him exactly what to do. That was it. I just gave him a direction. And bro, 6.5 years later, here you go. So you clowns don't tell me that this advice can't lead to something positive, that you can't take the technology world that you guys have grown up in and not do something positive with it. Now, you guys may not like that the screen doesn't look like, you know, the screens that you have on an Apple or a Microsoft or fucking Dell, whatever. But guess what? I think you're going to like that it's going to keep you alive longer, right? I'm sure Zaragoza wishes that his mom had that.
I've been searching for that type of device for years now.
Right. And that, you know, that's the point that I want you guys to get. I'm not trying to tell you to unplug and distract. I know that's not what any of you are going to do. What I'm asking you is to use light, use technology in a better fashion. The only way you're going to do that is when you stop believing that food and exercise fucking are the big driver. When you start to realize it's light and dark. You start realizing it's light and dark, then I'm going to get you on the right path. And then guess what? We're good.
Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to having you on the show again because all of us have a list of a bunch more questions that we want to ask you. But thank you so much.
All right. Sounds good. Take care, guys.
Have a great rest of your day.
Right, thank you, sir.
Get some sun.
All right.
Absolutely.
Will do.
Damn. He's pretty sharp, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, he's great. He's great. Man, a lot of things, dude.
Do you guys feel super anxious to get outside now?
Oh, yeah, 100%. 100%.
I am very curious about his bone density thing, though, because, like, I get what he's saying. Obviously, my N of 1 doesn't necessarily agree with that because versus everybody in the room, I probably have the highest bone density.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's partially because of my background. So I wonder about that, but you know, I'm curious to dig in on more of that because, like, I have seen people who do lift a lot and have big muscles that they don't have good bone density.
I do
so
think
what's
that
the difference?
I do think that the message is conflated. Some of the message that's out there about muscle, about people always talking about having muscle. I do think it's important to have some muscle because I think that muscle can kind of help chew up calories, but that is actually the problem with muscle is it does chew up calories, so it makes all of us hungry. Being super hungry all the time isn't great, but having some muscle on your body as you age and stuff like that, your body's naturally going to start to lose muscle. We see it in a lot of people. They tend to downsize as they get older.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether they're on stuff or not, you see it with a lot of people. But I think an important factor, and it's the reason why I say strength is never a weakness and weakness is never a strength, is because I do think it's always important to be strong and to send a signal to your body to be strong. And sometimes that signal to be strong, sometimes it makes you hold more muscle. But I think just having a bunch of muscle on you, while I think it looks good and it might be like an aesthetic thing, I think it's something that people should evaluate and they should think about it more. How much more do you weigh, now compared to when you were 18 or compared to when you were, in your early or mid 20s, and how much muscle mass, do you have? Like, did you put on like 50 pounds of muscle? It's like we start talking 50, 60 pounds of muscle. It's like, that's a lot. And I think we can all agree that maybe holding on to that amount of muscle for a long time, in your case, building it naturally might be different than somebody else that's like blasting stuff to try to hold on to every ounce of lean tissue that they can. So I think there is a lot to think about when it comes to just trying to hypertrophy your body. And even the way that we do it is really interesting. Like getting on like a leg extension or a hack squat or something and really trying to target some of these areas. When you think about it, it's like, well, that is like extremely unnatural. I'm not saying that you can't do it, but if you did it more with like lunges and step ups and
pull-ups.
Think resistance. You did it via sprinting hills, you did it by carrying stuff. I mean, we were designed to walk and or run for really long distances. And we're definitely designed to carry shit. So you definitely have the strength to do those things. But when you start to think about that, you start to think about, what would that body look like? And I'm not saying every body has to look the same, but that's where you would start to end up with a lot of people looking a lot more like our boy Andrew, or looking a little bit like Paul Saladino, where someone's like kind of long and lean, and they're not like overly hypertrophied in any particular areas.
Who do you think he was talking about when he was saying like, everyone's thinking it's food and exercise, right? Because when I feel like that's the minority. I feel like doctors and everyone is not really saying that sort of stuff, but he was saying that everyone's saying that. So I'm a little bit confused because I feel like the opposite is true.
Probably in the fitness space.
Is that what he? Okay,
I'm assuming that's what he meant, because like you are right. Doctors, when it comes to something like exercise, they'll mention it to people, but they'll say exercise isn't going to be the thing that makes you lose weight, right? Or it's not a huge deal. So I think he's talking about people in the fitness space, because people in the fitness space are all about diet and exercise. I do really agree with him about the light piece, because it's like, it is underestimated. It is not talked about a lot, but I'm going to get his Patreon and look more into his stuff, because I still don't think we can discount what people intake as food and the way that they have their habits as far as not just their exercise, but the movement that they get. Like, I don't think those are inconsequential. I know he didn't say they're inconsequential. He just put them lower on the tier list. But, it's something like, for example, my grandma who lived to 100, there was a certain point where she probably should have been getting more light, right? But, as she got older, her eyes were rough, but she still made it a concerted effort to walk all the time, walk around with weights in her hand. She's doing that in her 90s. You know what I mean? And that played a big part in her living to a century.
I think everything's like a driver, so if you over-exercise, it's going to make you fatigued, and it's going to be a driver of you feeling like you shouldn't do something the next day, or it might be a signal to your body that you should conserve energy. It might be a signal to your body to eat a lot more food. And so I think, is it exercise? Is it food? Is it the sun? The sun can be a driver. Like, like we all know, like there's been days where you got a lot of sun and actually you don't feel energized. You actually feel wiped out. And I kind of wonder, like, that would actually be a great question for him. I wonder what that is. I wonder if that is like almost like an energy overload to some degree. Is it dehydration? I don't know if you guys understand what
exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I
like
call it sun drunk.
Yeah. And it's like, it's not like you were out just for like a half an hour. You were out for a few hours. Maybe you were in the ocean or something like that. And you were out in the sun or maybe you're at a concert or something like that. And you're in the sun for like 4 hours and you're just fucking wiped out. But anyway, my point being is like, I do think so many of these things are drivers of what we do, how we feel, even just where you live, living in like where I just visited Iceland and I'm excited one day to go visit Africa, but visiting these different parts of the world, you're obviously going to be doing way different stuff in Mexico or Africa or Iceland versus the things that you're going to be doing in Sacramento. It's not like you can't do all the same things. I'm sure you kind of could, but it just might be way harder or way easier. Might be way easier to get the sun in Mexico or Africa. It might be harder to get the sun somewhere like Iceland or somewhere like Seattle.
Yeah, and that's where my question about like your nationality or where you're born, and because right, what you were explaining when you came back, everyone looks a lot different out there. At least the ones that are thriving, right? Mm-hmm. And then same thing, like as you get closer to the equator, the skin tone's going to change.
People are huge too. Like they're so tall.
So that's where the question is.
Unbelievable.
It's like, okay, if you are naturally from that area, then I would just assume that there's something in you that's going to make you thrive in those conditions. And so I'm curious if his thought would be if everybody would just be way better if they started moving closer to the sun.
That is one thing that I think, like, for example, I'm grateful for my upbringing because most of my childhood was outside. Like, I played soccer. I was on field multiple days a week, just running, sprinting. School too, always outside for a majority of the time. So it's like, I think that there's a lot of luck involved with that because both my parents, I know where they're from. They're from Port Harcourt, Nigeria. You know what I mean? That part of Nigeria is where all my family lineage is from, right? So those people got a fuck ton of sun all the time. And if that wasn't the case for me, I mean, shit, who knows? I mean, I have a sibling who has mental illness. And we lived with a lot of what we did was very different coming up. So I wonder if that played a role.
I mean, I know for myself, just being someone that enjoyed video games when I was young, like if I stayed inside for I remember this would happen quite a bit. We would have snow days in New York and you didn't have any school. And so I'd just like hang out with my friends and where at my friend's house, he actually had his video game console was in like a living room. And then there would be a window, and so it'd be bright in there. But at my house, it was like downstairs in this basement that was like refurbished into like a playroom type thing. And I remember like if he and I were down there in that darker room for a couple of days, you would just feel like you would feel depressed. We'd order fucking like Domino's pizza and shit like that, and like just chill down there and play Madden or Bill Walsh football from back in the day.
Damn, that's a throwback.
Yeah, I know it's really long. I'm fucking old, but I just remember like that feeling. A couple days later, not only was the sun out, but now the sun is now reflecting off of the sun is now reflecting off the sun. You'd come out and it's like coming out of a movie theater. Mm-hmm. And you come out
off of the snow.
Yeah. It's reflecting off the snow. You come out of a movie theater and that light just hits you and you're like, oh my God. Yeah. It takes you a while to readjust, but I remember that just felt way differently.
Yeah, I'm curious if growing up, because I loved video games and I stayed indoors for a majority. I did ride my bike and I did all those things, so maybe that has something to do with like how like skinny I was. But the other times I was inside playing Sega all day long, right? That's all I did. But I'm curious, in conjunction with eating a lot of processed foods, not a lot of protein as a kid, if all of that has something to do with like my gut issues. I would imagine that it does, but who knows now? But
yeah, I definitely think it would for sure. And then in line with what he said, on our podcast today, and in line with stuff I've heard him talk about before, is the depression side of things. You mentioned that you've had depression before, and sometimes people say, "Oh, there's like a dark cloud over me."
That's literally what I say.
Yeah, and it's like, well, you're probably like in the dark, kind of. And then it's a driver though too, because it is addicting. It's addicting to like comfort yourself. It's addicting to grab the blanket, be next to the fireplace, and sip your hot cocoa. Because you're now stacking a bunch of things that are super comfortable. Mm-hmm. And you're just thinking like, I just want to stay right here and you don't want to move. And so it's a driver of your, of like what you do a lot of times.
Yeah, not to get too far off on this, but not only do you not want to move, but you don't want to feel better. You, the things, it's almost like you get a dopamine hit from feeling worse. So you start seeking out excuses to be more depressed. I don't make enough money. Meanwhile, all your bills are paid and you got plenty of food in the fridge. I don't make enough money. You can be in good shape. You could not be overweight like I was. Damn, I wish I was in better shape. Like you start seeking all these things because that's where your little like upper is like, negative times a negative. It becomes your positive. And it's such a weird thing. And again, sorry to get all sidetracked on it, but now I'm like, with this information, and this is the part that I'm like kind of like concerned about, is how far am I going to be able to take it? right? I mean, all this shit right here I have in my house. Like, how much of this am I going to be able to remove? My son started playing with the Nintendo Switch. He has fun with it. Am I going to take that away now? Right? Like the TVs, I've been wanting to get rid of them for a long time, but like how much of a psycho do I become after hearing all this stuff? Because, all things considered, and hopefully nothing bad happens, my family's not going to die tomorrow. But does that mean keeping all the blue light in the house, eventually, is that going to catch up to us? It would, with this information, it would seem that would be the case. How soon and how much do I act on this like information? And that's a part where I'm like already having a hard time in my head and arguing with myself. Like, no, obviously, like you need to pull all the stops. Like you have the reasoning now. The other side is, well, shoot, how are we going to, enjoy life as a family in this day and age?
Yeah, it's like I think maybe you can kind of just think of like, how do I just incorporate little bits and pieces of it, just like we've done with diet. You've had a evolution of your diet. You used to try to like Frankenstein a lot of your foods, and you were into that, and actually helped you get leaner, helped you get in shape. It was something that served you, but over time, you've made your diet better and better. If you would have tried, if Nsima and I would have forced you, and we're like, dude, this is what you got to do. This is the way you're going to be able to get the best results the fastest. You might have been turned off by it, and you might have actually went the complete opposite direction. So I think people listening, wherever you can incorporate some of these things, incorporate them, and don't let anything be a block. Just because it's cold outside, don't allow that to be a block to not be able to ground or earth or to get some sun. It just might take more precaution. It might take more thought. Don't go outside and like literally freeze your ass off. Don't go outside and get frostbitten on your feet. Like you have to, and don't go outside in the sun and get burnt. Like it's going to take you time to get used to the sun. You can very easily, and this is where technology can come in really handy. You can very easily on your phone check to see what the sun is like and like what is the sun emitting for that day. Because UVB rays can be very dangerous if you don't have a solar callus and you go outside and you're redheaded and very fair skin. Like that's just going to hurt, and it's going to be very damaging, and it can be very harmful. So you got to kind of build into some of that shit. I do think the thing that he said about the bomb was really really wild and really profound. And again, I think he's just trying to elicit a lot of thought. The leptin prescription, I think, is anybody that listened to the show, I think it is something you should look into more and look up. And many people are probably seeing, a lot of the stuff that I'm posting. I'm, walking outside barefoot. I'm doing more cold therapy than I was in the past. I'm doing more red light therapy, and I don't really have anything to report that's like substantial. I can't say like, oh, my bench is way up or something like that, or I'm running way faster. Or there's really nothing to report at the moment, because I think that these things take time. All I can tell you is that I feel good and that I feel great. I don't have any injuries, but I don't think that's enough. I don't think it's enough to be like, hey, you got to do these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one thing for sure that I'm going to do is, because you can see when the sunrise is going to occur, I'm just going to make that a daily habit and make sure I'm outside, put as little clothes as possible that I can manage, and then just make sure I get in the habit of watching the sunrise every day, because that's something that I don't do, because I wake up before the sun comes out, and then by the time I'm done being inside, the sun is out again. It's out already. So I'm going to see if I can figure out a way how to alter my schedule so that way I can make that happen.
Yeah, and I've mainly been cold plunging in the morning, but I'm going to try that evening now. I mean, I'll still probably use it in the morning, because like I try to use it in the morning and then get some sunlight, because you mentioned, David Herrera mentioned that like if you get in the cold, you'll be able to absorb more sunlight, right? So I'm still going to do that, but I'm going to use it in more evenings and see how I feel with that.
It feels so good to use the cold therapy. I mean, I guess I do have some things to report from that. Like, I woke up this morning, my back was tight. I felt like under recovered from a couple workouts that I've done in the last couple days. Mm-hmm. Just felt tight. You get in there and like, obviously when you get out, you're numb. Today the temperature was at 41 degrees. So that's going to make you super numb being in that temperature. But even right now I feel good. and I feel good to do a workout today. So, I mean, I think that people have known that for a long time. I mean, athletes been utilizing that's the thing too, is we see it so much on social media, and then you have a lot of people being like, I don't think it does anything. It's like, well, why have professional athletes been utilizing this technique forever? Like, they may not have actually known all the different things that it did, but they knew for sure that it was really beneficial in terms of recovery. So I found that to be interesting.
Hypertrophy.
The other thing about the pharmaceuticals being like photosensitive, that's something I just kind of stumbled upon more recently, and I was like, what the fuck is this? That's pretty wild, because your blood pressure, you can help regulate your blood pressure and your cholesterol to a certain extent via the sun. Now, it doesn't make sense to tell somebody that has really high blood, like you've got really high blood pressure, or you have any sort of heart disease. It's like, go get yourself checked out and do all the right steps on there. But you can do a lot of great things for yourself via just by getting outside. But I didn't really realize that some of these pharmaceuticals that you might take, there's no free lunch. Some of these pharmaceuticals that you may take may make it easier for you to get burnt from the sun. So there's just things that I think, when you get a prescription for something, it comes with this giant, paper that it's got all this, and they do have some information on there, but they know that probably no one's really going to read it.
No one reads that shit.
and dig through all that. They're just hoping that the pill that they got is going to help them out.
So blue light makes chickens female.
I know, that was pretty wild. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty.
I'm kind of like, I have nothing else to add to that, because like,
yeah, people, just please go and look these things up. I will also say that please listen to the David Herrera podcast that we did with David. David is brilliant. Follow him on Instagram. He also has Solar Athlete. You can also check that out. But David has a lot of great information. We've had Jake Benson on the podcast before, and Jake knows a lot about this stuff. He knows a lot about this stuff via getting a lot of help from David Herrera. And those are both two guys that can produce tremendous amounts of force, tremendous amounts of power, and they don't weigh. Jake is pretty big, but David, I think maybe at 198 or something like that. I think he's deadlifted over 800 pounds. Mm-hmm. I could be messing that up, but I know that him and Jake are tremendously strong. And then there's also Joe Sullivan, who follows a lot of these similar principles as well, and he has or did have at one point the all-time world record, in the squat. So to me, it makes sense. I think a lot of these things can really be way more powerful than we originally gave them credit for. In terms of podcasting, I don't know if you remember, but when we originally started this, like the first one that I did, I filmed outside. Do you remember that? I filmed out.
Yeah, we were at that park in Davis.
Yeah, we filmed it outside. And so maybe occasionally we can just, it would be nice. It would be nice to, go find a spot and just sit down and occasionally do it outside. But here in Sacramento, it gets a little too hot. And a little too cold. The cold, yeah. We'll figure something out.
Stop being a bitch, man.
It's a little chilly. And then it gets wet too.
Yeah.
But that's not good for equipment.
I think we'll try to figure out how to hack it. Maybe we can calm some of the blue light down and get just like a little mix of red in here.
Yeah, because we're here in this location, I didn't have access to our normal lights that are a little bit more orange. These are way blue. And what's funny is that the literature, the labels and stuff will say that this is daytime balanced. But this shit is so blue. I don't know why they call it that, but they do.
And just, so people are aware, the sun does have blue light, and blue light is not all bad. However, the artificial blue light that we receive, the artificial blue light that we get, is really just one spectrum of light. It doesn't come accompanied by the red light. And so red light can actually help UVA and UVB and blue light. It can all be almost like a protector of it. And forgive me if I'm a little off on some of this stuff, because I am new to learning some of this stuff. So I might not say everything 100% correctly, but I believe that's what the story is. Strength is never a weakness. Weakness is never a strength. Thanks you guys for following along. Catch you guys later. Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, which I know you did because you got this far, then click this one right here, because you'll enjoy this one just as much. And if you're choosing to still listen to me currently as I'm telling you to go over here and watch this video, well, hey, that just means you like the sound of my voice. And, well, I'll just keep seducing you right here. Hello.